Allow me to describe a phenomenon I have observed repeatedly in my practice, which reveals something fundamental about the narcissistic psychological structure. There is a particular type of empath that the narcissist instinctively recognizes as a mortal threat. It's not the empath who easily dissolves in the narcissist's presence, the one whose boundaries are so permeable that they absorb the other's emptiness without resistance. The narcissist loves this type of empath because they serve perfectly as a mirror. No, I'm talking about another type. The empath who possesses something rare and disturbing, awareness of their own limits combined with the ability to see through the masks of others. This empath is dangerous because they cannot be consumed. And when the narcissist identifies such a person in their territory, a specific psychological war begins. The story I'm about to tell involves Helena Vasconcelos, a 52-year-old architect whose reputation in the field of sustainable architecture is impeccable. Her São Paulo office has designed buildings featured in international magazines. Her public persona is meticulously constructed, a visionary woman who overcame a male-dominated industry through sheer talent and unwavering determination. She gives lectures on female empowerment. She mentors young female architects. She appears on panels discussing ethics in design. The mask is perfect, so perfect that even she believes it most of the time. But those who work directly with Helena know a different reality. Her office has an extraordinary employee turnover. Talented people enter full of enthusiasm and leave 6 months later, a year at most, with a peculiar look in their eyes. It's not just exhaustion from working long hours in a competitive industry, it's something deeper, a quality of disorientation, as if they had forgotten who they were before entering Helena's orbit. Helena's psychic structure is built upon what I call total identification with the persona. There is no real Helena behind the mask of the visionary architect. The persona has completely consumed any authentic self that may have existed. And because there is no genuine inner core, Helena constantly needs to draw psychic energy from others to feel that she exists. Every project her office completes is presented as her singular vision, even when ideas came from her employees. Every success is absorbed into her personal narrative. Every failure is projected onto others. The mechanism works like this. Helena hires talented and empathetic people. Initially, she seduces them with intense attention. She asks questions about their lives, their aspirations, their dreams. She seems genuinely interested. And in a way, she is genuine, but not in the way it appears. Helena is mapping the psyche of these people, identifying points of vulnerability that she can exploit later. She specifically seeks out empaths because they are easier to manipulate, more willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, more likely to absorb her projections without resistance. Once Helena identifies someone's wounds, she uses them. If a young architect mentions that she always felt she needed to prove her worth, Helena will create situations where that architect will have to prove her worth repeatedly, never being enough. If an employee reveals insecurity about their technical skills, Helena will constantly question those skills in public meetings. It's not conscious cruelty in the conventional sense. It's Helena's shadow operating automatically. She projects her own fundamental inadequacy onto others and then punishes them for the qualities she herself cannot accept in herself. For 20 years, this system worked perfectly. Helena built a professional empire on the psychic bones of dozens of people who passed through her office. And then, in March of a particular year, Lucas Mendes accepted a position as senior architect in her office. Lucas was 34 years old, had an impressive portfolio, and something that Helena didn't immediately recognize as a threat. He had done deep therapeutic work on himself. Lucas was an empath in the truest sense. He sensed the emotional states of those around him. He had a natural compassion for the suffering of others. But unlike the empaths Helena had consumed previously, Lucas had developed what I call conscious empathy. He could feel the emotions of others without absorbing them as his own. He had clear boundaries. And crucially, he had the ability to see through false personas to the emptiness they concealed. On Lucas's first day at the office, Helena performed her usual routine. She gave him her full attention, asked personal questions, and created a sense of special connection. She expected to see in Lucas's eyes what she always saw: gratitude mixed with slight intimidation, the recognition that he was in the presence of someone exceptional. But what she saw was something different. Lucas smiled politely. He answered questions professionally, but not revealingly. And there was a quality in his gaze that Helena couldn't categorize. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to neutral recognition. As if he were seeing exactly what she was and wasn't particularly impressed or disturbed. This triggered something primal in Helena's psyche. On an unconscious level, she recognized that Lucas would not be an easy mirror. He would not reflect her greatness back to her. And because her entire existence depended on being reflected in the eyes of others, the presence of someone who refused to provide that reflection was an existential threat. Here's what Helena couldn't consciously know. When a narcissist meets an empath with boundaries, it's not just practical inconvenience. It's a confrontation with the fundamental emptiness that the persona exists to hide. Lucas, simply by not dissolving in Helena's presence, was forcing her to confront the fact that perhaps there was nothing real to dissolve. If he didn't need to validate her, perhaps she wasn't as essential as his persona insisted she was. That possibility was absolute terror. Then began what I call a campaign of psychological neutralization. Helena didn't consciously decide to destroy Lucas. The decision was made at deeper levels of her psyche, where defense mechanisms operate automatically to eliminate threats to the ego structure. What followed was a series of psychological tricks that narcissists employ when they encounter empaths they cannot consume. The first trick is what I call an artificial loyalty test. A few days after Lucas started, Helena called a team meeting where she harshly criticized the work of another architect, Jung, who had been in the office for 3 years. The criticism was disproportionately severe for the actual errors in the project. Helena was creating a situation where everyone in the room would have to choose, agree with her brutal assessment or defend their colleague. It was a psychological trap. Agreeing meant complicity in the cruelty. Defending meant being labeled disloyal. Lucas observed the dynamics without initially saying anything. He saw Jung shrinking in his chair, saw other team members looking down, avoiding eye contact, saw the subtle pleasure in Helena's eyes as she demolished Jung's work. When Helena finished and asked if anyone disagreed with her assessment, there was a tense silence. Then Lucas spoke. He didn't defend Jung directly. Instead, he steered the conversation towards solutions. He acknowledged the problems in the project but suggested constructive approaches to resolving them. His tone was calm, professional, completely devoid of defensive emotion. Helena felt this as an affront. Lucas hadn't played her game. He hadn't joined the attack or positioned himself as a heroic defender. He simply rejected the entire premise of the exercise. And in doing so, he exposed her cruelty as unnecessary. The whole room felt the shift in energy. Suddenly, what Helena was doing seemed petty and mean-spirited instead of strong leadership. The second trick Helena employed was calculated social isolation. In the following days, she began organizing important meetings without including Lucas. When he inquired about projects, she provided incomplete information. She created situations where Lucas lacked the necessary context to do his job effectively. The implicit message was clear. You are outside the inner circle. You don't belong. For a typical empath, this would be devastating. Empaths generally have a deep need for belonging and harmony. Being excluded from the group creates anxiety that leads them to work harder to regain acceptance. But Lucas had done work integrating what I call the archetype of the loner. He was comfortable existing outside of groups. He didn't need constant approval to validate his sense of worth. So when Helena isolated him, he simply continued doing his work. He requested necessary information through official channels. He documented when information was denied. He showed no anxiety or desperation for inclusion. This disturbed Helena even more. The isolation should have made Lucas more malleable, more desperate for reconnection, but he seemed completely unfazed. Worse, his calmness exposed the childishness of her games. Other employees began to notice. Why was Helena acting this way with someone who was clearly a competent professional? The question wasn't verbalized, but it hung in the air. The third trick was subtle gaslighting. Helena began to contradict things she herself had said. In a meeting, she would give Lucas specific instructions about a project. Then, when Lucas executed it as instructed, she would insist that she had said something completely different. She did this in front of others, creating confusion about who was remembering correctly. For a victim of gaslighting, especially an empath who doubts themselves, this creates a feeling of losing touch with reality. But Lucas had learned to protect himself against this type of manipulation. He began documenting everything: emails, confirming instructions, meeting notes. When Helena tried to insist that he had misunderstood, he calmly produced evidence of what had actually been said. He didn't do it confrontationally. His approach was purely factual, almost bored, as if he was simply correcting an administrative error without emotional baggage. Every time Lucas didn't react the way Helena unconsciously expected, her anxiety increased. You see, the narcissist needs to provoke an emotional reaction in others. Anger, sadness, confusion, anything. These reactions confirm that the narcissist has power, that he exists, that he matters. But Lucas refused to provide these reactions. He remained neutral, professional, slightly distant. It was as if Helena was screaming into a vacuum where no sound echoed back. The fourth trick was triangulation. Helena began using other employees as messengers and spies. She would tell Maria, a junior architect, that Lucas had criticized her work when he hadn't. She would tell Paolo that Lucas was trying to sabotage a specific project. She fabricated conflicts, pitting people against each other, always with Lucas at the center. The intention was to create an environment where Lucas would be rejected by his own group, where his colleagues would turn against him. But Lucas had built solid professional relationships with his colleagues through consistently respectful behavior. When Maria came to him concerned about the criticisms Helena said he had made, Lucas calmly clarified that he had never said such things. He hadn't attacked Helena in that conversation. He simply corrected the record, and Maria, who had worked with Helena long enough to recognize the patterns, began to see what was happening. The fifth trick was attacks on professional competence. Helena began to criticize Lucas's work publicly, looking for tiny flaws and magnifying them. When he presented designs, she demolished them with technical language that sounded impressive but was substantially empty. She questioned every decision, demanded excessive justifications, constantly shifting the criteria for success so that Lucas could never meet them. For someone with fragile self-esteem, this would be devastating. But Lucas had a solid internal sense of his own competence. He knew his work was good. When Helena criticized him, he listened to see if there was valid feedback. When there wasn't, he simply continued. He didn't internalize the criticism as truth about himself. He saw it for what it was, an attempt to destabilize him psychologically. Helena's inability to break Lucas was driving her more and more to despair. On a conscious level, she rationalized her campaign against him. He didn't fit into the culture. He was resistant to feedback. He was undermining her authority, but subconsciously, she knew the truth. Lucas was a threat because he saw through her. His constant presence was a mirror reflecting not Helena's greatness, but the emptiness where her authentic self should be. The sixth trick was escalation through false reconciliation. Helena called Lucas for a private meeting. She completely changed her approach. She was gentle, even vulnerable. She said she had been harsh with him because she saw so much potential. She said that perhaps she had projected her own insecurities. She used therapy language she had learned in one of the lectures on emotional leadership she gave. She offered to mentor Lucas personally, take him under her wing, make him her eventual successor. This is a particularly insidious trick. After a period in cases of psychological abuse, the narcissist offers sudden warmth and intimacy. For an empath, especially one who has been hurt by previous treatment, this can be irresistible. It's like water to a person dying of thirst. The empath wants to believe that they are finally being seen, that the previous cruelty was misunderstood, that genuine connection is possible. Lucas listened to Helena's performance with a neutral expression. When she finished, he politely thanked her for her words, said he appreciated the opportunity to work on interesting projects, and steered the conversation towards practical work matters. He didn't take the bait. He didn't reveal any personal vulnerability that Helena could later exploit. He didn't allow himself to be seduced by the promise of special intimacy with her. Helena felt the rejection like a physical blow. She had offered something that normally guaranteed absolute loyalty, the promise of being chosen, of having special access to her. And Lucas had rejected it with polite indifference. At that moment, something in Helena's psyche began to crack. If this trick hadn't worked, if she had offered her all and been rejected, then perhaps the problem wasn't Lucas. Perhaps the problem was that there was nothing real to offer. The seventh trick was what I call malicious mirroring. Helena began to study Lucas more carefully. She identified his strengths, his systematic thinking, his ability to remain calm under pressure, his professional integrity, and began to accuse him of the negative versions of these qualities. His systematic thinking was rigidity, his calmness was coldness, his integrity was disguised arrogance. This trick is particularly cruel because it takes someone's best qualities and twists them into flaws. For an empath who lacks self-clarity, this can create deep self-doubt. Perhaps my strengths are actually weaknesses. Perhaps I'm mistaken about who I am. But Lucas had done the work of knowing his own standards. He recognized his genuine strengths and limitations. When Helena tried to twist his positive qualities into negative ones, he simply disagreed with the assessment. And disagreeing, without becoming defensive or angry, was the most powerful response. The eighth trick escalated into an explicit professional threat. Helena began suggesting that Lucas's work wasn't meeting office standards. She put it in writing. She started building a file of criticisms she could use to justify eventual dismissal. She was preparing the ground to eliminate him from the office completely. But Lucas had documented everything from the beginning. He had evidence of his contributions, emails showing that he followed instructions that were later disregarded, testimony from colleagues about the quality of his work. When Helena tried to formalize her criticisms, he responded with documentation showing that the criticisms were unfounded. He didn't do it emotionally. It was purely professional, almost bureaucratic. And this calmness was what disturbed Helena the most. Here is the crucial psychological dynamic. Every trick Helena tried was a projection of her own shadow. When she accused Lucas of being rigid, she was projecting her own inability to adapt. When she called him cold, she was projecting her own emotional emptiness. When she questioned his competence, she was expressing her own deep self-doubt. But because these projections didn't stick to Lucas, they came back to her, like echoes returning without being absorbed. For 6 months, Helena tried trick after trick. Each one was met with the same response from Lucas: professional neutrality, clear boundaries, a refusal to engage emotionally in the games. And each failure pushed Helena deeper into psychological crisis. Her persona, so carefully constructed over decades, was cracking because she had finally encountered someone who didn't reflect the illusion back. Others in the office began to notice a change in Helena. She was more irritable. She was making mistakes she had never made before. Her attention was fragmented. In meetings with clients, she lost her train of thought. The mask was slipping, not only in relation to Lucas, but in general, because the entire system depended on everyone reflecting its grandeur. When one person refused, the whole structure began to destabilize. Maria, the junior architect who had been used in the triangulation, began to see Helena's patterns with new clarity. She approached Lucas one day and asked how he remained so calm. Lucas responded in a way that revealed his psychological understanding. "I don't take anything Helena says or does personally. It's not about me. It's about the emptiness within her that she can't confront. My presence forces her to feel that emptiness, and she reacts as any cornered animal would, with aggression. But her aggression can't hurt me if I don't believe her projections." This is profound wisdom that Lucas articulated. The narcissist's power over the empath depends entirely on the empath absorbing the projections as truth. The moment the empath recognizes this isn't about me, this is about you, the spell breaks. The accusations, manipulations, attempts at control all lose their power. The narcissist is left naked, revealed as a frightened child, using desperate tricks to avoid confronting their own emptiness. Maria asked Lucas how he had learned this. He told her about his own therapeutic process. Years working to understand his own wounds, learning the difference between healthy empathy and pathological absorption of others' states, developing what we call observational function, the ability to observe psychological dynamics without becoming entangled in them. It wasn't an easy or quick process. It was years of work. But the result was a kind of freedom Helena would never know. The freedom of not needing external validation to know who he was. While Lucas was telling his story to Maria, Helena watched from afar. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw the way Maria looked at Lucas with genuine attention. She saw a connection being formed that she couldn't control. And this triggered the 9th trick, an attempt at reputational destruction beyond the office. Helena began spreading stories about Lucas in wider professional circles. She insinuated to other architects that he had ethical problems. She suggested to clients that his work was unreliable. She used her established reputation as a weapon, counting on people to believe her simply because she was well known, and Lucas was relatively new to the scene. This trick is particularly dangerous because it operates in territory where the victim has the least control. Lucas could document what happened inside the office, but he couldn't control what Helena said in private conversations with other professionals. Rumors began to circulate. Some clients questioned his inclusion in projects. Helena was trying to destroy not only his position in her office, but his professional prospects in general. But Helena hadn't anticipated that other employees in her office, especially those she had consumed in previous years, were watching. They saw what she was doing to Lucas and recognized the same patterns they had experienced. And something changed. João, the architect Helena had publicly humiliated months before, began documenting his own experiences. Maria contacted former employees and uncovered consistent stories of psychological abuse. A group began to form, people Helena had hurt over the years, who now saw their experiences with new clarity through what was happening to Lucas. They realized they hadn't been inadequate or weak. They had been systematically manipulated by someone operating with specific psychological tricks. Seeing these tricks used on Lucas, and seeing Lucas not being destroyed by them, gave everyone a different perspective. The 10th trick Helena tried was self-victimization. When she realized she was losing control of the narrative, she completely changed her strategy. She began to present herself as a victim. Lucas was intimidating her. He was creating a hostile environment. She, a woman in a leadership position, was being attacked by an ambitious man who wanted her place. She used social justice language, appropriated feminist discourse, and transformed herself from aggressor to victim. This is a particularly insidious trick of the modern narcissist. They have learned to use the language of vulnerability and oppression as a weapon. Helena knew exactly which buttons to push in a culture where issues of gender and power are sensitive. She was counting on people automatically believing in an older woman versus a younger man without examining real evidence. But Lucas didn't respond, defensively or angrily. He simply remained professional, and the group of former and current employees who had seen Helena's patterns presented contrary evidence. They showed that Helena had used the exact same tactics against women in her office, that her appropriation of feminist language was strategy, not genuine conviction, that she was, in fact, harming genuine causes of justice by using her language as a shield for abusive behavior. Helena's crisis reached a critical point when a partner at the firm, a man who had worked with her for years but maintained an emotional distance, began asking questions. He had noticed the employee retention problems. He had seen the documentation Lucas kept. He had heard rumors from multiple sources, and he was concerned not only about ethics, but also about the firm's potential legal exposure. When confronted by her partner with evidence of the patterns, Helena tried her 11th trick, a manipulative, emotional breakdown. She cried. She said she was overwhelmed, that she had given everything to the office, that she was being persecuted. It was a calculated performance to generate sympathy and deflect responsibility. Helena had seen other people use vulnerability to escape consequences and was trying to replicate it. But the partner had seen this trick before, too. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't convinced either. He suggested that Helena take a leave of absence, seek professional support, that perhaps they needed to reassess the office's management structure. It was a polite way to start the process that this would eventually remove Helena from a position where she could continue to hurt people. For Helena, this was the end. The persona she had built over decades was completely crumbling. And unlike Daniel in the previous story, who consciously infiltrated Victor's world, Lucas had done nothing more than exist within healthy boundaries. He hadn't planned to destroy Helena. He simply refused to be destroyed by her. And that refusal, that simple presence of someone who didn't absorb her projections, was enough to destabilize her entire psychic structure. Here is the fundamental psychological truth. A narcissist who depends entirely on external reflections for a sense of existence cannot tolerate a mirror that refuses to reflect the illusion. Every trick Helena tried was an increasingly desperate attempt to force Lucas to play the role everyone else had played, to validate his grandiosity or be broken by the attempt. But Lucas had a third option that narcissists don't foresee: professional neutrality with absolute boundaries. This is the stance that a conscious empath develops. It's not coldness or lack of compassion. Lucas felt genuine compassion for the frightened child trapped in Helena's adult body, for the fragile psychic structure that needed constant validation to exist. But compassion didn't mean absorbing her emptiness. It didn't mean sacrificing his own well-being to support her. It didn't mean pretending that her illusion was real. Lucas had learned a crucial distinction between empathy and entanglement. Empathy is the ability to feel with someone while maintaining a separate sense of self. Entanglement is when boundaries dissolve and you get lost in another person's emotional field. Empaths who are consumed by narcissists haven't failed to be compassionate. They've failed to maintain the necessary separation between compassion and self-annihilation. The outcome wasn't clean or satisfactory in the way simple narratives would suggest. Helena didn't have a transformative moment of insight. She didn't recognize her patterns and embark on genuine individuation. Instead, she did what most narcissists do. She found a new narrative that preserved her victim image. She left the office claiming burnout, fabricating a story about sacrificing her health for work, insinuating that she had been forced out by internal politics. Some believed this narrative, others saw through it. Helena eventually opened a smaller consulting firm, still attracting some clients based on her former reputation. But the operation was a shadow of what it had been. She never regained the same level of power and influence, and without that power, without a constant flow of people to consume, her psychological existence became more precarious. Lucas remained in the office. With Helena gone, the atmosphere changed dramatically. Employees who had been walking on eggshells began to relax. Creativity that had been suppressed began to emerge. The office didn't become perfect. Organizations never are, but it became functional in ways it hadn't been under Helena's regime. But the story isn't really about Lucas triumphing or Helena being defeated. It's about what happens when two fundamentally different psychological structures collide. Helena represented what happens when the persona completely consumes the self, when there is no genuine inner core, and all existence depends on external reflections. When the shadow is so unacceptable that it has to be constantly projected onto others. Lucas represented a different possibility, a self that had been integrated through conscious work. Boundaries that had been established not as a defense, but as a natural expression of a differentiated self. Empathy that didn't need entanglement to validate its own existence, and crucially, the ability to see through personas without needing to destroy them or be consumed by them. The tricks Helena tried weren't unique to her. They're the narcissist's standard arsenal when faced with a genuine threat. Loyalty tests, social isolation, gaslighting, triangulation, attacks on competence, false reconciliation, malicious mirroring, professional threats, reputational destruction, self-victimization, manipulative dismantling, each trick designed to break down the empath's boundaries, force them to absorb projections, turn them into a compliant mirror. The reason these tricks often work is that most people, especially empaths, haven't been taught about psychological dynamics. They encounter a narcissist and assume they are responsible for fixing or saving that person. They assume that if they are compassionate enough, patient enough, understanding enough, the narcissist will eventually open up and genuine connection will be possible. They don't understand that there is no genuine self there to connect with. There is only emptiness sustained by reflexes. Lucas understood this, not because he was especially strong or resilient, but because he had done the work of understanding his own psyche first. He had confronted his own shadow, integrated his own wounds, established his own sense of self that didn't depend on external validation. And from that position of inner integrity, he could encounter Helena's external fragmentation without being pulled into it. This is the crucial lesson for empaths. You cannot help someone integrate their shadow if you haven't integrated your own first. You cannot establish healthy boundaries with others if you haven't established internal boundaries with yourself. You cannot see through false personas if you haven't confronted your own. And you certainly cannot survive an encounter with a narcissist unscathed if you haven't developed a sense of self that exists independently of the reflection in the eyes of others. The danger that empathy represents for a narcissist is precisely this, the presence of someone who doesn't need the narcissist, who doesn't absorb the projections, who doesn't sustain the illusion. This presence is a mirror that reflects not grandeur, but emptiness. And when the narcissist sees this reflection, when they find someone who cannot be manipulated or consumed, all the tricks emerge. Not as a conscious choice, but as an automatic response of a psyche confronting potential annihilation. Helena had found such a mirror in Lucas, and because she lacked the inner strength to process what this mirror showed, she tried to break the mirror. When she couldn't break the mirror, she tried to hide it. When she couldn't hide it, she tried to distort what the mirror showed. When none of that worked, she tried to deny that the mirror existed. And eventually, when all options failed, she left the mirror's field of vision because she couldn't bear what it reflected. This is the tragedy of the narcissist. They are desperate for genuine connection, but are unable to allow it to happen. They need someone who truly sees them, but when such a person appears, they experience it as a mortal threat. They want to be loved, but can only accept validation of their false selves. And validation of the false self is not real love. It is merely more fuel for the illusion that keeps them isolated from any possibility of real intimacy. Lucas didn't save Helena. No one could. Salvation, in the psychological sense of genuine individuation, can only come from within. Helena would have had to choose to confront her own emptiness, integrate her own shadow, dismantle the persona that consumed her. But doing so without an internal structure to support her would be like demolishing a building before having a foundation to replace it. The collapse would be catastrophic. So Helena chose, as most narcissists choose, to continue the illusion in a diminished form, instead of confronting the truth that would completely destroy her sense of existence. The story ends without dramatic resolution because psychological life rarely offers such resolutions. Helena continues to exist in a smaller version of her former empire. Lucas continues his work, now more aware of the patterns to observe. Former employees of Helena process their experiences, some eventually integrating them as painful but valuable lessons, others carrying scars that never fully heal. The takeaway is this: when a narcissist sees an empath they cannot consume, it's not recognition of an equal or a worthy competitor. It's a confrontation with the intolerable. The presence of such an empath reveals that the entire structure of external validation upon which the narcissist builds their existence is unsustainable. And because consciously acknowledging this would be ego death, the narcissist must try every trick available to neutralize the threat. Not out of conscious cruelty, but out of a primitive psychological need to preserve the only sense of existence they know. And the tricks will always come, because the narcissist has no other tools. Without a genuine self to offer in an authentic relationship, without the capacity to see others as separate from their own projections, without internal resources for emotional self-regulation, tricks are all that remain. And they will try each one with increasing desperation, until they either manage to break the empath's boundaries or, as in Lucas's case, finally retreat before someone who cannot be broken. This is the ultimate truth. You don't win against a narcissist by fighting. You win by not playing their game. You win by existing with such complete integrity that their projections find no place to take hold. You win by maintaining such clear boundaries that their tricks find only empty space where they expected to find vulnerability. And you win by deeply understanding that nothing a narcissist says or does is about you. It's always, always about the terrifying emptiness they carry and cannot confront.